My pitch basically is sport is one of the biggest elements of our world, and it meets geopolitics, it meets global money, it meets global culture, and there's so many interesting stories there.
Hello and welcome to Outlines, a podcast about sport, stories and the media. My name's Owen Connolly, hope you're well. It is great to have you listening. And it's great to have you back. We've had a few weeks break from each other. Hope you had a wonderful time over the Christmas period and you've come into the new year energised and ready to go again, or something like that. Not always easy. In that spirit, we're going to be taking a slightly different approach maybe in this episode, certainly one tailored to the demands of the calendar. We're going to look ahead to some of the themes and topics and events that will be shaping the sports news agenda in 2026. Our guest is Tariq Panja of the New York Times, a veteran of multiple Olympic Games, World Cups, European Championships and more. He's a man very much familiar with some of the places where sport meets commerce and geopolitics, particularly some of the murkier fringes and the more surprising locales. His career has taken in stints at Bloomberg, Eurosport and the Associated Press, and he's the co-author of Football's Secret Trade, How the Player Transfer Market Was Infiltrated. We talk about what to expect when the biggest ever FIFA World Cup heads to the politically volatile shores of Donald Trump's America, what the Olympic storytelling environment is like, and how big money is altering sport in ways that are still a little hard to make out. And Tariq also explores how sport acts as a window into some deeper, more complex concepts in finance and international affairs, lays out his approach to following stories over the long term while being ready for the unexpected, reflects on some of the more colourful tales he's followed at global events, from cyber attacks to Irish administrators fleeing the authorities in their birthday suits, and plenty besides. Tons to get your teeth into, hopefully an engrossing way to resume the series. You might have noticed that my voice is not faring that well in this intro, so I'll speed run the usual request to get the word out about the podcast, rate, review, share, etc. Social media details in the show notes as ever. But let's get into it. Here is Tariq Panja. It's always a way of telling kind of what your job is like in media, depending on how reliably you can suggest the time. And I think this is the third time slot we've gone for. Admittedly, one of them we had to squash because of Virgin Media at my end. But but it's 8 o'clock, gone 8 o'clock after bath time and bedtime for me on a Monday night that we're finally able to pin you down, Tariq.
And we also know that if we didn't do it today, there's a chance it might not happen as well. So I'm glad we're able to do it, man.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on. And obviously, we've moved in similar circles a fair bit in the past, but let's catch up a little bit because we're going to talk about the year ahead. But what seat are you kind of observing all this from now? Because you're kind of on the beat, but you're also doing a lot more longer stories, a lot more kind of multi-handers, in-depth investigations and stuff at the New York Times now.
Yeah, so the role's a bit different. I think some of your listeners might know that the New York Times bought The Athletic a couple of years ago. So we had a standalone sports desk at the New York Times, and that was shuttered about a year after The Athletic was purchased. And my background, as you know, is like sports news, and as you said there, but some investigations back then as well. And essentially, I'm now a foreign correspondent. I work for the international desk, but with sport still in most of the time, not all of the time. That's the other evolution professionally, is that I've been writing about other things in the last year or so. With sport still kind of the backdrop to a lot of the stories. So, my pitch basically is sport is one of the biggest elements of our world, and it meets geopolitics, it meets global money, it meets global culture, and there's so many interesting stories there. I mean, and the other side, I don't know about you, like there'll be certain esoteric subjects that people might not know that they're interested in, but if you add a sports element to it, they might then think, oh, okay, that was quite interesting. Example, I did a story last year about the post-Gaddafi Libya, for example.
Mm.
It's split in two with two governments, one recognized by the UN in the West, on the Western side, and then there's another government in the East run by this general. This is how the country functions, but it's also how the Football League functions there. So I kind of stumbled into it. I went to Libya this summer just gone on another story related to something else entirely, and was in a hotel, and there was a football team staying in a hotel I was in Tripoli, Ittihad Football Club. It turns out I didn't know any of them. I'll be honest with you, I didn't know any Libyan football teams. The only thing I knew was Colonel Gaddafi's son played for a few minutes, somehow paid his way to play for Perugia or something in the noughties. Anyway, and I asked him, what are you doing at the hotel? Why are you here? And they said, oh, they're preparing to go to Italy. I was like, oh, wow. Like, what are you guys doing in Italy? So, yeah, we're going to finish the league at the Libyan Championship in Italy, in Milan. I was like, right, put that on my notes, finished the job I was there for, and came back and said, you know what, this would be really interesting. We could tell the story of Libya, because the security situation meant that teams from the East and the teams from the West couldn't meet in country. So you have two leagues going on.
Yeah.
The top three from each ended up going to Milan and having this tournament. And I went and covered this event, not as an event, but to tell this story. And that kind of is a long-winded way of saying what I'm kind of up to now in some ways is stories like that.
Yeah, I mean, how is that? You're bringing, I suppose, your sporting perspective to geopolitics and finance and stuff like that, and those sort of stories that you'll be picking up on. But I mean, you always did that the other way, when you, not just when you were at the Times, but at Bloomberg as well before that. Yeah. But like, how has this stint maybe changed the way that you think about how those different worlds converge?
I just think it's confirmed that they do converge massively, especially with football. The kind of platform it has, nothing has quite the platform football has in the world, I think, right now. And that attracts, a lot of power, whether it be financial power or geopolitical power to the stage. I mean, we're coming to the start of the year after we've had a Club World Cup in the United States with Donald Trump at the center of it, handing out the trophy and not leaving the stage there. He was like, the FIFA Peace Prize, also awarded to Donald Trump. The Saudi project, still very significant, still very meaningful. FIFA's reliance on the Middle East. Also, a lot of these currents that you see elsewhere, outside of sport, they're often, sport's almost like a petri dish for some of these things. I often found, like some of the dark arts that we saw related to, like the Gulf blockade, that situation, the diplomatic spat between Qatar and its regional rivals, some of the kind of disinformation campaigns and things like that on all sides, I felt was almost being tested in football or the Qatari World Cup and their relations elsewhere. We almost got the first view of some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And that kind of informs and influences some of the big politics as well. Also, some of the actors are the same as well. I found in some of the other reporting I've been asked to do, it's some of the sourcing, it can be the same. Some of these players are kind of multifaceted. They're involved in this, they're involved in things that are far away from sport, but it's the same actors sometimes.
Yeah. And there was a really interesting example recently, just talking about the Saudi project, where you had that comedy festival, and the debates between people who had basically the people who took the money and the people who decided to stay home and tell people that they had done. And a lot of the conversations you might have heard 3-4 years ago, kind of in a sporting context, and it feels like some of that's already been processed now, and kind of we are where we are with that. And I know, in some respects, if you look at that specific example, it's slightly different because it's more directly about speech in a way that sport isn't. Sport is people kind of doing their job and they're just doing it in a different country. But that is really fascinating, the way that certain things are downstream of where they happen in sport, and certain things are kind of upstream of it. Like, just with all of that in mind, like, what do you think are going to be some of the themes that are going to define the sports news year we have ahead? We obviously have the two biggest events, albeit a minor version or a slightly different version of one of them in the Winter Olympics, and then of course the biggest ever TM FIFA World Cup in North America and Mexico over the summer. Do you think the agenda has been set, or do you think that things are going to emerge? Like, how do you? I mean, I'm asking you about 4 different questions at once here, but how do you, as a news first kind of journalist and a reporter, as opposed to a commentator or someone who's purely going and kind of covering matches, how do you think about that news agenda looking ahead a year? Do you try and leave space for yourself to be reactive? Are you just following strands that are, months and months old, even if you're coming into a year? What's your view on that?
I think it's different for me, and again, I've got a bit of luxury in this as well, in that I don't have to write all of the time, so you have time to think, and so there's certain stories I might have been thinking about for a year maybe to try and unravel, and then you kind of have my view is kind of slow, medium, fast in a way, and trying to always have something percolating, a very slow moving thing sometimes, but and think this could be, and also be prepared to fail as well. And again, that's a luxury as well. This is interesting. Keep picking at the seam. Something might come open here on something that I've found interesting. And then you'll have like tentpole enterprise stories that these events are coming, World Cups, Olympics, and things like that. And then you would be planning ahead of time and doing the reporting very, very specifically related to that stuff. And then obviously, I mean, I explained earlier what's happened in terms of my day to day. I'm working for the front of the paper in a way rather than back of the paper in a way British audiences will understand. Maybe sports page at the back, news page at the front. So the bar, sometimes frustratingly, is even higher to get. I think that's a great story, and they'll be, well, is it big enough? Well, it would be big enough for the sports pages for sure, because it's a great sports story. But does it cut through enough? So there's that to think about as well. I think this year, though, with the World Cup in mind, we've already seen it's enormous, isn't it? Because the world's most powerful man, very idiosyncratic character, has decided he wants to stamp his personality, his presence all over this thing. It's the world's most popular sport by a mile. We live in this era of second to second news engagement, social media, all of it. It's the loudest it's ever been, the news environment, if you want to call it news or information environment. This thing gets a lot of engagement compared to many other kind of facets of life. And then you have these characters, don't you? You have obviously Donald Trump in the White House. You also have an increasingly, from my perspective, having sort of covered FIFA for 15, 20 years and seen a lot of kind of peculiar behavior over that time, a very, very strange FIFA president as well, in the kind of behavior and the kind of positioning. Gianni Infantino,
he's gone very front of house.
It's very, very, very peculiar. And then you kind of add in the geopolitics of the moment. It's quite hard to look beyond that and the issues surrounding 2026 as the big stories. It's so hard to look beyond because it's a news magnet, and it also is a thought magnet as well. You can't you're permanently thinking about this. Like, what we've seen as we're recording this, we've had Peace Prize on late December. We've then had Venezuela's president Maduro, however unpopular and whatever the rap sheet, we didn't expect, you don't expect the US to do, essentially go and grab him and take him and his wife out, especially after the peace prize, I guess. And then we've got events in Iran and talk from the White House about repercussions for Iran right now. Iran, of course, the first Asian qualifier for this World Cup. They'll be there. They weren't given, I think, half of the 8 allotted places for the draw, including the president. I mean, there's so much. And then, you're thinking with the World Cup, it's the World Cup, clues in the name, but is the world welcome? Is this a country that wants foreigners in it? What does that look like? And then also this era of hyper capitalism with these ticket prices being at levels that are quite discombobulating for people who aren't American or familiar with American culture. Then you get other questions like, who is the World Cup for? And then you start thinking about FIFA and money. You think, hang on, why do you need this much money? Because, what is your mission? Is it to get, as wealthy as possible at any cost? Is it to, attract more people to your sport? Would that mean young boys and girls from wherever they are in the world get to go to the World Cup with their parents? Because that probably ain't going to happen at this rate. There's it does create all of these questions around this, and it is it sucks a lot of your attention and your thinking power around sports news stories. But there's other ones as well. Look, it'll be a foolish man to guess, given how many people have tried, when the Premier League's ruling in the Manchester City case involving those, 130 charges of rule breaking. But that is enormous on all levels. Whatever happens, that's the other thing. It's not going to be good for anybody, right? This case, because you're talking about this team that's owned by, well, at least the brother of the ruler of the United Arab Emirates, with all of those state assets, a close British ally, on a diplomatic level, big investor in the UK. We're saying, accusing them of essentially corrupting the national game for the best part of a decade, corrupting Britain's biggest soft power tool, if you want. I mean, it's pretty high stakes stuff. And then on the other hand, for the Premier League, everyone's looking at them saying, well, what's your governance system like? You're this kind of best in class league, so called, right? And this hasn't been brought to a conclusion. So I think we'll get this year maybe, and I think that is seismic, big news. It will explode here in Britain, then the tentacles go everywhere. I also think 2026 big year for private equity in sport. Now, I think the general listeners will turn off now, but I think we haven't looked at that enough at all. It's been kind of underreported because, like the American businessmen, but we're seeing some of this play out a bit. The private equity piece, not American billionaires. We've had the Glazers obviously for a long time and seen that effect. But we, again, recording this time of Clear Lake, Chelsea, effectively summoning the manager of the junior partner in this MCO system, Strasbourg, to London, and he comes over. Now, what does that say about the football pyramid? The pyramid that everyone was talking up when there was this, battle to the death over Super League, this thing that has to be protected. What are football? There's these big debates that stem from this. I think this could be a year of that. And then there's the kind of social stories with the IOC is going to make a firm decision, or its regulations at least, on what constitutes a woman who can compete in women's sport, and that's going to obviously create a lot of hand-wringing and a big debate. So World Cup first, but obviously loads of stories.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come back to the World Cup because I think there's so much to unpack there. But a kind of broader point of those, certainly the points around Man City and private equity, is that these forces have always been around sport, but it feels like as you say, the stakes are so much higher in the City and the Premier League case. And in private equity's case, it's somebody coming along and taking a look and saying, well, financially, particularly now that it's not just a case of, we just cut a check for media rights every 3 years and it's a little bit bigger than the last one. Financially, what you think of as being valuable and what you think of as being ways of monetizing this whole system, the money thinks differently, or at least is gambling differently on it. Like, is that something that you feel, because you've been on the sports news beat in one form or another for about kind of 15 years or so. Is that a way that you think maybe the industry's changed? It's gone from being like, oh, by the way, there is a sports industry, to actually now the kind of industrial forces are acting on sport in ways that maybe they haven't before.
Yeah, I think they've decided, and that's quite interesting to see as well, that they, like, this quest for permanent growth, right, and permanent places to invest, and permanent returns. Like, there is no sacred ground. Nothing is safe, right? Because this money is looking for areas that are unoccupied, and we got to get in here. And I think in the last few years we've seen that this space is what they have, one of the places they've alighted upon recently, and that changes the game in terms of power. Again, who these are very powerful forces, big, very, very, very influential, very wealthy people coming in, and also it kind of, they're like, right, we want this as an asset class, and because we say we want it, that means it must be right. And that I found quite interesting as well, because I always used to think balance sheets were important things, but in the last few years, I just kind of think, well, aren't I stupid? Because it just seems to be, I don't understand, like in the old-fashioned sense, valuations to me make, like, if I was looking at this before, how is this worth this much money? Well, it's because they're willing to pay that much money. That for me, like, is smoke coming out my ears. And then it feels a bit pyramidy in that, well, someone else is going to pay us more, so let's just get in now at whatever this price is. That, for me, sounds really scary, especially for someone who, I guess, is British, was into, from British football, and sees our kind of clubs. We could talk about other ancillary businesses and whatever they invest in, whether it's food and beverage companies and all that, but I'm not really interested in that. I'm more kind of, I guess, sensitive to our football clubs, wherever they might be in Britain or overseas, like what they are in essence, what makes people keep coming back and why they exist. I just think it wasn't for profit in the same way American sports, I'm going to call them sports companies, they call them franchises, don't they?
Yeah.
So, but they were built as businesses, whereas these have been turned into businesses without anyone being asked, are you okay with that? And I think these two forces might collide very, very emotively in the years coming forward, because you're already feeling it, aren't you, from whether it's fans at the kind of higher end or further down the pyramid, that there is chafing.
Yeah.
And something's going to give. Do you know what? There's really interesting. Real Madrid, and this is because of this valuation era we're in. Valuations are at these kind of crazy numbers, and they're seen as not crazy in Europe because American ones are higher, as if that makes sense. That it's cheaper than this other crazy number.
Yeah.
But again, look under the hood and you've got a different story as well if you wanted to see it. But it almost like, if you could just imagine this thing, then it comes to be. But yeah, Real Madrid. So Real Madrid and Barcelona, people have been, fating them as being this model that they like because it's a member-owned institution, or they're member-owned institutions. These members, socios or soci, if you're from Barcelona, they'll pay 250 quid to be a member and owner of these clubs. And then, but we're in this era of hypervaluations, and if you're Real Madrid and you're seeing on Forbes like, yeah, we're worth 10 billion, why don't we sell 10% of this? And they've been caught up in this, and I think that's the other big story of this year. Real Madrid are going to have they formally announced it as well. They're going to have this this vote for selling, minority stakes. I think, was it 10, 15%, whatever. And that's the end of something, isn't it? This club's over 100 years old. This is the stuff that people have been celebrating, and it feels like that is the end of something. Should it be mourned? It depends who you ask as well. I think some of that tradition's quite nice, and I think Barcelona they've said they're not going to do it, but two clues or two reasons why I think they will, is they always copy what Real Madrid do in the end anyway, and then the other one is financial basket case. So that's going to change, and that's only going to change, I think, because they don't want to miss this valuation bandwagon, which I think is unsafe. And then it makes me think about another thing. It's like, well, who was looking after football? You have all these governing bodies, whether you have them domestically, the FA or the Premier League's rules, and then bigger, I think, FIFA and UEFA. They're all obsessed with cash as well. They're obsessed with money rather than like any kind of protecting the heritage. It's just not, heritage is not important anymore as much as people say. It's this quest to almost regulation, that regulating part of their model of what they are, FIFA, the governing bodies, the governing part, I think they find really irritating and boring, and they just don't want to do it. And now we see it with MCO. It's like, well, it's too big now. What are we going to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's the point you were making earlier about how this is a way of understanding dynamics that are happening elsewhere, that maybe if if it was happening to a shipping company or something, you might glaze over unless that was your world. But when it's happening in football, and the other parallel I'm thinking of is the movie business, which is going through something quite similar, in that for a long time it felt like the model in sport was based on, you have a game that people want to watch, and everything kind of flows from there. You have attendances, and you have media rights, and you have sponsorship, and everything that's built around the audience and the people who want to watch, and the players are paid because they bring in the audience and everything else. And what's happening at Chelsea is they've realized that because there's limits on where they can make money elsewhere, because of their stadium and what have you, but also they're just willing to exploit it, I suppose. They've realized that player trading can be an enormously lucrative way of keeping the spigots flowing.
They're also a fascinating, quite terrifying window.
Yeah, but you get these odd things, and you get kind of, in cinema about 18 months ago, it was sort of films just getting written off as tax write-offs.
Yeah, but
before they'd even been released. And a similar thing is happening with football players right now.
That's
and it's
super interesting. I didn't like, but it's giving nothing back to the arts, right?
Yeah.
That this film will never be seen, but there is a tax benefit from doing this mechanism or maneuver. And again, it's the kind of the very sharper end of where we are with business and economics, where that's allowed. I feel like that's a failure somewhere in how that rule or that's allowed to happen. So if you think, the thing with Chelsea, the other part of Chelsea is Clearlake and Bowley and these guys. They're from the very, very, very complex world of financial engineering and private equity and all of this stuff at the very, very sharp edge of trying out things to like how do we do this? And what I didn't realize, again, is where one thing teaches you about the other thing. A colleague of mine, she wrote a piece, again, really sounds really boring, about something called continuity funds, right? And Clearlake are the masters of this thing, because for private equity companies, the big return is when you flog one of your companies that you've bought. But then if you can't find a buyer for them, what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to show your returns? And again, this is my sports business reporter's understanding of this, and I've never worked for these businesses or really covered them in any great detail in this sense. But what was super interesting was, so what they do, they created this continuity fund where you sell one of your own businesses back to another part of your own business. And I read her piece, and I thought, hang on a minute, aren't Chelsea team that pioneered selling themselves hotels in the Premier League and then selling themselves to women's team and all of this stuff. So those practices that they're well versed in this kind of world where there aren't supporters and I guess passionate followers of them, and you could do it almost quieter. I'm sure, workers and people who have things at stake in these companies obviously feel it a lot when these movements happen. But football is followed by having millions of people, and teams are. So, but it was the similarity of this, and I thought, wow. So you do wonder where it will end and what the point of all of this is and how it benefits football and sport. And to the other part of this is supporters, especially match-going supporters, I think, they've been kind of overlooked in terms of their importance. Not because they're buying tickets or not because they might protest or anything like that, even though that is very, very important, but I mean more like the fans inside the stadium. They formed a tapestry and backdrop and the sound of football, and they have for forever. And it's one of the reasons, why do broadcasters, really like the Premier League a lot, because these stadiums are really full, and in Serie A, you have these empty seats, and broadcasters don't like that. It's part of the reason why some of the valuations from broadcasters goes down. So the fans have they're creating value for these people who are then exploiting them. There is a really funny dynamic here. It's not that funny. But then I've also noticed as they've out some of the noise. So you're watching quite a lot of this football at the moment. It looks ostensibly like it always used to as well. But as these prices have gone up and things like that, these stadiums are awfully quiet. I don't know if other people have noticed this, but you're watching this and thinking, it all looks kind of colourful maybe, but you can't really hear anyone. And that's kind of different as well. And I wonder if this is because of the people being priced out.
Yeah. That brings us back in a narrow sense back to the conversation we were having about the World Cup. And obviously it might be a different one from the perspective of who's in the stadium. I know kind of the US sports industry is very different, and the expectations can be quite different about, what major league prices are like and stuff like that. So you won't necessarily not get proper fans in because certain people will have priced it in differently, but certainly it might feel different from sort of the festivals that you've had in other countries in the past. And you might also have an issue just with the sheer scale of it. Not an issue, but it will be a huge complicating factor for people on the ground, for people watching it. It will be the first one that you can't really follow the thread all the way through because there's just too many games and too many what's the word I'm thinking of here?
Venues.
No, just too many things that have to happen in concert with one another.
Oh, right, yeah, too many permutations.
Too many permutations, that's the word I was thinking of.
Yeah.
And, it's going to be a different World Cup in a lot of respects, even before you factor in some of the kind of geopolitical dynamics that you were talking about and the things that are happening on the ground. One of the things that's interesting, and, to briefly flag another podcast that you're involved with, Libero, I've heard I think it's Rory Smith has said this a couple of times. When you think about the World Cup in the US in particular, that people haven't quite grasped how big this is going to be on American soil. They haven't realized, when I hear about conversations about the political situation in the US at the moment, it's quite rare that you hear someone say, oh, and there's a World Cup coming up.
Yeah.
Which, when the last two World Cups have had, shall we say, complicated hosts, but that was always something that was talked about when it came to the domestic political situation, and particularly in Qatar for obvious reasons because it's so small. But, with the US, other than the Infantino relationship, people aren't thinking, well, what is the immigration situation or the situation on American streets right now? When you add tens of thousands of football fans into the mix, what does that mean? Will it mean they row back? Will it mean, you get just a different dimension to that? What does hosting this World Cup mean when you've got frosty relationships between the three neighbours and you've got to keep the show on the road for the better part of 2 months? All these kind of things. Is that scale something people are prepared for? The scale of having 16 extra countries and what that means for the media footprint and all the rest of it.
I think it's Rumsfeldian known unknown situation, isn't it? And you're right. I mean, I've been thinking about it. It's three countries as well, three pretty large
Yeah.
countries. Like the US is massive. Canada, the footprint of Canada is huge, and Mexico is not a small place. And even just inside the United States, well, FIFA have obviously created three sections. They've sectioned the World Cup out into West, Central, and East. Even then, I mean, these are continental-sized movements here that you're going to have. And then in that context, you're going to feel like you're in a World Cup when you're on the ground, or is it just another Tuesday in Kansas or Dallas or whatever? And I guess it couldn't be more extreme, the pivot though, right? 2022 in the smallest place that you could host, whether you should or shouldn't, is that they did host a World Cup in, to this enormous footprint. And the thing, like Qatar, I always described it as like it was a theme park. It was a World Cup theme park. The entire landmass of Qatar was given over for this football tournament, and it was played essentially in one city in Doha. And obviously you had the stadium in Lusail there as well. But it was like the games are in London, and then you'll have some in Watford. If you're familiar with the geography of London and the Metropolitan line,
yeah.
So that kind of extreme difference. So are we going to feel like we're in a World Cup, and is it going to feel buzzy and exciting? Because is anyone feeling good in the world right now? It's like everyone's pretty miserable. There's a bit of fear around it. It's really expensive. It's a very expensive place to go. And then are they up for it in the way, previous hosts, take the politics out, were for it? Russia, it was that. I remember the first week in the eve of the World Cup in Moscow as a reporter. It was extremely exciting, and it was also very joyous. The first week of the World Cup is always one of my favorites. The first 2 or 3 days in particular, because all of these people come with full of hope. They're excited to be at the World Cup. I love the World Cup as a kid. Even now, it's still really exciting because it brings all of us together in football cultures as well. And in Moscow, there's that street where it was just incredible. Like you walk down it, and you'd see, I don't know, 15 different nationalities en masse doing their thing, whatever the chants are, whatever the singing is, whatever the culture of their football is, on display on the same street. Very organic as well, and it felt pretty incredible to witness and be part of. You saw some of that in Qatar, I suppose, as well, even though I think that was not as attended and as joyous as the one before. But this one, what you're looking at maybe is the diaspora over there. That's what I was quite excited about the World Cup. But then in some ways, you feel like the diaspora is under attack internally. From powers of the White House. For some of them, at least, it feels a bit like that. So is that joy there? Does it exist? And then, as you said, just trying to move around and work and cover it. This is going to be unlike anything else. And then from an engagement and attention point of view, this is testing people's kind of devotion to this tournament in ways that we haven't before. 48 teams is a lot. 104 games are a lot. That group stage, 48 teams, and then you play, I don't know, is it like 60 matches or something to get rid of 12? And then you'll have the last 32 for the first time, a knockout match. Some of them are at risk of being lopsided. We've seen a little bit of this in the African Cup of Nations we've had just now, where you've had a very, very stodgy group stage, third place teams going through with 2 points, and then teams that clearly aren't good enough really to be in knockouts, getting to knockouts and being eliminated. So from a kind of sporting perspective, that might be a bit tricky.
I mean, it's almost more like an Olympics in terms of how the stories will be generated and
Well,
consumed, isn't it? Because it's sort of there's just going to be so much going on everywhere, and it will be locally relevant in different parts of the world. No one's going to watch all of it, but there'll be heroes who emerge and all the rest of it until you get to certain concentrated points of attention,
yeah,
which in
yeah.
the Olympics is typically specific events, and in the World Cup will be, I know they've got the top 4 seeds. They've done it tennis style, so they all stay apart to the semi-finals, but certainly the kind of quarterfinals, semi-finals.
That'll be huge. I mean, because they're massive matches, aren't they? I mean,
Yeah.
once you get into dare say even a round of 16 situation, and you get some big team is going to get kicked out of the World Cup in a thrilling encounter, and we're all going to get sucked into it, and that's why it's so popular. So I always say, FIFA got this monopoly on this amazing thing. It must be the easiest thing in the world to sell. It
Yeah.
is. It is just, especially those big knockout games. You then have this issue of this dynamic pricing. See how that's going to work. I'd hate to see these enormous stadiums empty up. I haven't seen empty seats at World Cup for probably 1990 in Italy. There was some group stage matches back then. Travel was different. It'd be horrible if you have this. So that'll be interesting to watch. And then the other part you said, is America ready? Now, as I mentioned, the football culture. One of the stories Rory and I, when together at the New York Times, that we enjoyed covering, we did I think it was his idea. It was really not. We spent a day. It was an audio-visual story about being an Argentine, being in among the Argentines at at the World Cup, and the songs and the passion and all of the color of being around that is it's pretty intoxicating. It's a really incredible experience. Now, Argentina are playing in Kansas. Are they going to be ready for the Barra Bravos and everyone else? Coming there to support Argentina, to follow, to make the noise. What's the local kind of cop going to be doing? And then it's we've just mentioned it, but again, the politics of the moment. Again, we're recording after this incident in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Well, there is worry for probably people from different parts of the world about how they'll be treated, the issue of this immigration enforcement unit, ICE or whatever. Will they be targeting the World Cup? I don't think we've ever had a tournament like that, have we? Where we're thinking.
Well, this is it, because I mean, when you think about when you've had explicitly authoritarian regimes or kind of stricter regimes, the terms of what a World Cup attendee can expect, they tend to be like pretty clear, basically. Whereas this is the great unknowable: is at this point, are we going to see extreme cynicism from this agency, and they start, thinking, well, there's going to be World Cup games on, so there's going to be people who maybe have questionable immigration status? Or are they going to say, look, this is meant to be a time of celebration. It doesn't make us look very good if we intervene here or interfere, so we'll relax a little bit for the next 5-6 weeks, and we'll steer well clear of these areas. And at the moment, we have, it's the Rumsfeldian thing, as you say, and it's why, I guess, to go back to the thing you were saying earlier, you've got to have these stories that are on slow, medium, and fast streams, and you've got to know, when you've got to be reactive and when you've got to be waiting for, but not kind of prejudge anything going in.
Yeah. The other point you made about the last Russia and Qatar, those hosts, people immediately, when they were awarded the World Cup, people thought the worst of them from the moment they were awarded the World Cup for depending on who you are, whatever reason. They came from it was a very negative perspective. When the US were awarded hosting rights in 2018, they didn't get the immediate scrutiny and immediate kind of hand-wringing of these other places. So the reaction of those places was, at least for that month, let's be on our best behavior, and let's try and show whether it's real or artifice, this kind of very, very welcoming good side of us to everyone. And from a very basic perspective, the visa situation, if you think about Russia and Qatar, that entailed, if you've got a World Cup ticket, you get this fan pass, and that effectively guarantees your entry into the country, and you go and watch the World Cup, and then you move on. The US posture towards the World Cup is almost diametrically different to that. And that, get your visas in order, guys. We don't care if you've got a ticket, and then good luck. FIFA and the US have recently tried to soften that by saying there's going to be an expedited visa process. You go and get an interview. That's just a quicker way, maybe, of people saying, no, you can't come. Right. So it does feel, again, very different and perhaps not as welcoming as it was. And it's very hard to be excited for people to go somewhere where they think they're not wanted as well, right? Or something bad could happen to them. And this is really, really, really bloody expensive.
Yeah.
So there's like a lot of factors. And in terms of stories, there's the other big thing with all of these events, man. Stuff's going to happen, and these are stories that emerge and are big and could last a day, 3 days. It could be an underlying thing for a tournament. We don't know what they are yet, and they're usually. I've never been to a tournament that hasn't, either Olympics or Football World Cup, Euro. There's always a story. We'll get into the Olympics in a bit, but last Winter Olympics, you wouldn't have thought. Well, maybe you would have thought there would have been a Russian doping story, but I wouldn't have thought that. Like a 15-year-old minor, great hope, destined to be one of the great figure skaters ever, is going to be dinged in a doping scandal with 3 banned drugs in it. Like, that story had a life of its own. And I think Olympics, actually, more than football, for journalists, because a lot of these sports, minority sports, broadly speaking, those stories kind of hit harder in those events because the athletes aren't as well known.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Olympics. That's a good cue to kind of move on to that for the remainder of the conversation. It's a really different storytelling environment because, a World Cup, the attention levels are similarly high, arguably higher, but you have 3 discrete events a day, max, or 4 in the last World Cup, 4 games a day. Whereas the Olympics, there's something happening all the time. You and I have both covered Olympics, kind of more from a sports news side than an event side. And you're kind of, I remember being in Rio, and that feeling of there is a story like everywhere you turn your head is so palpable when you're in the Olympics, particularly because, this is a bit of an inside baseball thing, but Olympic accreditation is like a golden ticket. You go anywhere you want. You just rock up, and so long as there's not too many people in the press box, you can go and sit down and watch. So it's a really extraordinary storytelling environment, whether it's the Winter Games or the Summer Games.
Yeah, and extremely political as well.
Yeah.
I remember, because we're coming to the Winter Olympics, going to South Korea in 2018 to Pyeongchang. And again, I'm no aficionado of winter sports at all. Again, of events I have to cover, I find the Winter Olympics very hard in terms of knowing, exactly what's going on.
You don't know the inside out.
Follow the news.
Yeah,
follow the
news. Judging or anything like that.
That had the incredible storyline right at the start of a massive hack on the systems that disrupted the opening ceremony of the it was the first cyber attack of scale on an Olympic Games. And right at the start, and you're thinking, wow, these things, they spend years preparing for all of this stuff. It's a coming out party, it's a big deal for these nations. And then geopolitics, or, it was linked to, Russia were banned 2 years after the big doping scandal. This was the first Olympic Games they were properly banned from. And then this thing happened right from the get-go. So there, bang, you got a story straight away. And that kind of sets the tone. And with that one as well, there was will they, won't they, will they, won't they, with North Korea.
Yeah.
Sending a team, and they sent this strange collection of very, very minded fans to various events. And then there was the kind of theatre of, in fact, I've got it here, I've still got the flag, the joint North and South Korean ice hockey team.
Yeah.
At that event. So yeah, this like news happens all the time. If you think about Rio as well, again, when you go to these places and you mention that it's like constant news, you could never have. Oh, I lived in Brazil at the time, so familiar with the and Rio in particular, familiar with the with some of the security risks. But there was that story of the American swimmer, big celebrity as well, wasn't he? Ryan Lochte.
That's it. Yeah.
It's a credible story claiming to have been robbed at gunpoint at a gas station or something like that.
Yeah, like 2 a.m. after some party. Yeah.
But it turned out that wasn't the story at all, and they'd made that up somehow, right? And apologized. Became a diplomatic incident between the US and Brazil. Yeah, so all these events, there's going to be stories. We don't know what they are all the time, do we?
Yeah, that Lochte one, I think, so I was out for about a week of that Olympics, and I think that happened maybe the day or 2 days after I went home. So there was that one. Yeah, because I mean, there've been all sorts of stories around that Olympics that were, some kind of administrative misfire. Obviously, they kind of had, because of much, much bigger political issues in Brazil between about halfway through, basically, their planning. Their budgets had been cut very severely, and you had things like, the metro only opening only to fans and only opening about a week before. I think I was on one of the first trips out to an IOC session or something. And then things like the diving pool going green and all these things happening. And generally speaking, when there were stories that didn't happen, this coming back to the thing about following an agenda versus being a little bit more kind of responsive. You had stuff like Zika and things like that never eventuated. But what are some of your sort of personal favorites? Because there's another one that you were quite intimately being the operative word involved in uncovering those games in that week. Again, kind of the kind of second week of Rio.
So I covered it, but not as intimately as, I think this is a story you mean, as Jamil Sade, great Brazilian journalist, who's now at WALD. I think he was at Folha de Sao Paulo then, a good friend of mine. He went with the police of federal police of Brazil each year, in Rio, on a dawn raid on an IOC member's hotel room. And this is the famous story of Patrick Hickey, the IOC member from Ireland, being accused of scalping tickets at scale. In Brazil, ticket touting, secondary ticket market at the time, I think it still might be, is illegal. And this is an IOC member doing it. Big scandal.
Yeah.
But the what I think you're alluding to is, for some reason, so the police have banged on his door, and there's the crew there, Jamil's there as well. And I think he was in the room next door. His wife and he were in a room, and he had a adjoining room for his kids or something. He'd sneaked off into the room, the adjacent room. And when the police banged on that door, for some reason, he opened the door, but he didn't put any clothes on. So there's the film crew, and then Patrick Hickey sort of running away naked behind the door. That was all over Brazilian news on in the TV screen. You don't know what you're going to expect at the game, but that's a great example. Great scoop for Jamil. I'm not sure he wanted the full bird's eye view, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, to talk about a story that had everything. I mean, we're exposing corruption, or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
When competing, and there's that many stories, because that was one. As I say, there were so many kind of misadventures through those games, and fairly or unfairly, that was kind of how they were coloured. But when you have a story like that, or like the Lochte one, do you kind of need some of those little details in your, when stories are your currency, to kind of cut through and to be like, this is the one that's going to leap out and that people are going to be talking about, beyond sort of a dry misappropriation of allocated tickets?
100%. 100%. I think, especially for me, like the detail and the color of these things, it's what drives the story. Even for me, my own interest, always trying to get a bit more color on what's happened there. And if you wait just a bit longer to get a bit more, it can just explode into something kind of incredible. And I think readers appreciate that too, isn't it? A bit more layered, a bit more texture. Bring these cartoon villains to life a bit. Like the 2015 FIFA scandal had a lot of characters, and then it is essentially just a embezzlement or bribery scheme and all that. And they've been, since there've been human beings, there've been these people doing this.
Yeah.
But then you have to bring your Grondonas and Teixeiras to life a bit.
Chuck Blazer with his cats.
Blazer, and I love these little details as well. If you can get the little details, I mean, I remember with the 2015, I had to do that remotely, but I'd been covering FIFA long enough. When the police raided the Boralac hotel, they had a list of names of all the people they were going to try and get. One of the guys got up a little bit earlier, and he was having breakfast in the hotel, and had gone to raid his room, and he's eating his breakfast, and someone who was there with him told me, he's like, "What's happening?" He said, "Oh, they're raiding FIFA." And the guy kind of quietly made his way out, walked past the police, and managed to go on the lam. And this was one of the Argentine TV executives. And again, that brings the story to life a little bit as well, of some of those moments.
Yeah. What's a story or a trend that's on the horizon this year that you think people might miss, that might evade people, quietly finish its breakfast and kind of sneak past?
Maybe not evade, but maybe one we're not thinking about, and it will happen. I feel it's going to happen. And again, it might be a bit dry, but I think the clubs are going to take control of club football in Europe. More and more from governing body a little bit. I think we might see governing bodies, FIFA and UEFA, weaken. But we've seen European court judgments and cases right now. And I think we might see a fundamental change to how, which I don't think is a bad thing, to be honest, how football is governed, and what these organisations that we've had for so long, if they're not willing to change, they might be forced to change. That might be one. The other one, I think, is I wonder if the public are going to have enough soon. The fans, and various, we talked about it earlier in the pod, are we going to see, I don't know what that means though, because European sports fans aren't American-style customers, and we're seeing more of that business model being imported, more of those investors, more of this money looking to kind of standardize all of these things. Could this be the year we're going to see the pushback against that? And what does that look like? I think that's going to be really interesting. And if none of this happens, I have no idea what I'm talking about. We can get to this again next year.
Yeah. No, it sounds good. Let's move on to the three questions that we ask all our guests. The first is, do you have an origin story or something that sparked your interest in sport? I'm
a guy from the 80s, kid from 80s. love football. It was very, very basic. Love sport, love football in the winter, cricket in summer, and just obsessed with this. But my didn't see anyone from my background doing that work back then, but it was something I was really, really passionate about. And then my parents as well aren't from media background in any way at all. However, in our house growing up, like if you ask what the favorite TV program is, they'll say the news. So it's a bit of a I'm sure it must be other like Asian immigrants' households where the news is always on. I'm not sure why our parents went into other cultural pursuits, but and then in our case, from a very young age, we were very exposed to newspapers, particularly the Sunday Times. I remember as far as I can remember, it being a big part of the day, and thinking I really want to do what these people are doing.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, rather foolishly, that passion never really left me as I sort of grew up and went, to university and all these things. This is what I wanted to do, and really grateful to got the privilege to do that through forcing myself onto people. Please let me do this, and was able to cut through. I mean, the other part of my career is a bit different to kind of maybe other people's in our business. Now, I always liked foreign, or maybe again might be an immigrant background thing. Like your kind of your world is a bit bigger, or your interest in the world because you're from two cultures or whatever. And I was always obsessed with the news in the sense of it being on a global level. And I've worked for, I guess, foreign companies for most of my career. I mean, I started off at Eurosport in Paris while I was doing my degree at Manchester. I was doing French, and it didn't really help with my French, unfortunately. But I started working for Eurosport while doing my degree there. And that kind of never left me. And then joining the Associated Press and then Bloomberg and here at New York Times now, the kind of window has been really big for me. I feel really lucky about having that opportunity as well.
Yeah, because you've kind of had in your career, you've had both the thing of being the English speaker in a suddenly center of the world, particularly in sporting terms, country, when you were in Brazil, but also you've been the guy in London for these overseas news organizations as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have any listeners under 25. I mean, I doubt it, but
at all.
But I would say also the advantage of being open to learning languages and things like that has always helped, because being on the road, like if you're doing an interview or being anywhere, like a World Cup's a good one. These people come from all over the place. If you can maybe get by in more than one language, you might get a bit more. I remember there was the 2014 World Cup. I covered the game between Italy and Uruguay, and it was a game where Suarez bit Chiellini on the show. It was an incredible moment, right? Guys bit someone at the World Cup, and a big famous guy like that, two famous people. So I remember being in the mix zone, which is where you meet, chance to talk to the players if they want after the game. And there was this guy, the captain of Uruguay at the time. He was a central defender, and he played for West Brom. Anyway, he'd also played in Brazil, and he'd played in Spain, and so I see him, and obviously that was a massive story.
Yeah,
Luis Suarez has bitten Chiellini at the World Cup, and I see this guy, and said hi. Spoke in English because he was playing at West Brom. Dude, your man just bit Chiellini. Well, what? That's like, what's your reaction to this? Like, what you're saying? And he was like, no English. I was like, you're not getting away with this, pal. So I was like, all right, let's do it in Portuguese, because I'd been living in Brazil for a couple of years at that point, and it does help. It does help, So I would say having a just like try and make the world as big as possible.
Yeah,
that really does help.
Yeah, the other side of it, just quickly, you have you've seen how the sausage is made, let's say, and there's lots of people who go into, and particularly until fairly recently, it was quite common for the person who did the sports news thing. I mean, Andrew Jennings, I don't think ever particularly liked football, for example. but it was quite common for people not to particularly enjoy sport if they went into the harder news side of it and what have you. Whereas you were a sports fan going in. Do you kind of find yourself able to like separate those two parts of your psyche, the kind of professional part and the sports fan bit? Do you enjoy sport any less, basically, for having gone through all this stuff?
Yeah, I do a little bit less, but maybe I would have anyway because of the direction it's gone. So I can't tell if it's related to knowing, as you said, how the sausage is made, or just, I guess, sounding like an old person to say it was better when I was younger. There is a homogenization of it that I'm not a big fan of. I think we're losing bits of it. And the thing I still get a big thrill from, and I love it, is like a very full, loud stadium.
Yeah.
And that's why World Cups and Euros and things like that. And also, I guess, very exceptional, very elite moments. I dare anyone say that wasn't impressive. And then on the other hand, it doesn't have to be the very, very top end, but there's some incredible kind of stories that are created through sport, and they're not created anywhere else.
Yeah.
People do marvelous things, do incredible things, and I still love all of that. But there is a lot of sport content, and feels very kind of telegraphed, very much cookie cutter content. That stuff, I'm turned off by. And then from the media point of view, I'm very kind of anxious, not just for the sports industry media-wise, but broadly speaking, this kind of access journalism, and i.e. the people who get the access will pretty much, and it's not good. It's not good for society, I don't think. Is that they will, in return for this access, they will write and report and broadcast whatever information that's palatable to who has provided this access to them. And then a corollary to that is this influencer economy that is now enormous, very influential, clues in the name. But again, completely bypassing, I guess, media that would be more critical or likely to ask a question. The FIFA president, he does not do press conferences anymore. It might sound like a small thing, but in terms of transparency, in terms of holding people to account, it's a lot harder. And then you have these actors who kind of feign being journalists as the safety valve for these people. So hang on, no, we've talked to the media. Look, we've talked to this guy or these people. And there'll be a generation of people, young people, who think, well, that's how the media works and that's how it should work. And it really is I think, a huge kind of risk. And not because I'm worried where my next job's going to come from. I just think it's a big threat, really.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at the other end of things, more elevated end of things, what's your favourite piece of sports storytelling?
I was thinking when you asked, for me, and again, it speaks to my kind of interest in kind of colour and getting detail, getting behind the scene. And also, I love the absurd. Do I not like that?
Yeah.
This is I think it was Channel 4.
The Impossible Job. Yeah.
The Impossible Job, yeah. It's a documentary that was supposed to follow Graham Taylor's England's glorious run through qualifying to the 1994 World Cup. I just think as a piece of journalism, as a piece of TV, it's perfect.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a guilty pleasure as well. I'll pop it on YouTube now and again,
Yeah.
And I know, all I just think, so it was quite tightly produced as well. It was very tightly, it's very hard to condense all of that reporting into something as an hour long like this thing was. And they've done it superbly. And you get all of these characters come. It hit all the buttons that I think a piece like that should do. And most people, whether you're writing or if you're doing broadcasting or producing this stuff, you can rarely, for me, I mean, I'm the audience. So,
yeah,
maybe there's others who don't like it. But for me, I think that in my time. And then the other one I was thinking of, actually, not again for similar reasons, not it was again before my time, well before my time, and it's a way of showing that access doesn't need to be, traded for fawning good news, fawning kind of publicity for whoever's granting it. Is the and it wasn't a hatchet job or anything like that, but it just felt very real. It was the Glory Game, that book by Hunter Davis on the season with Tottenham, and it was kind of almost, I wouldn't say boring, but it was like these people are just going to work.
Yeah.
And different era then as well, of course, and they were, not as far away from normal people as Premier League footballers are probably today, but they were sort of superstars in some way. Martin Peters was England World Cup winner in that Tottenham team.
Yeah.
It kind of humanizes these people, and it showed it's not all, it's a job.
Yeah.
And there was something I really kind of was like in awe of. This guy's gone in there and he's told it like how he saw it. Again, I'm sure there'll be critics say it wasn't very good, but again, it's maybe a part of, how I want to work or what I'd like to do, or getting behind the scenes and being able to tell the story you see, I think seems harder and harder. So maybe because of my fear for the industry, that might be why I'm mentioning that.
Funny enough, John McKenna from Noah Media Group is a documentary filmmaker, also talks about The Impossible Job. And one of the things that he noted was that it had made life a lot harder for documentary filmmakers afterwards in football, because the amount of kind of access they got to dressing rooms and so on. It's taken kind of better part of 30 years for people to be given that again, because, you see how the story can turn away from you. But
in modern times, I think the ones where it goes wrong, because that happens in life as well, are the ones that people see more fondly, and the characters are warmer as well.
Yeah.
Sunderland Till I Die is a good example, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I couldn't tell you anything about any of the other ones, with Man City, Tottenham, Liverpool, whichever ones that have been made. But that one had a lot of color, a lot of characters.
Yeah, again, not the story that they thought they were telling when they
not the story they thought
it.
they were telling. Yeah.
What is, on that note, a sports story you'd like to tell or see somebody else tell?
I was thinking about this when you asked. I think there is a lot more to be done on the underpinnings of the academy system, of like where the production line of professional football talent. And again, I come to it from having lived in Brazil and in London. So London and Rio, and been to obviously Sao Paulo, spent some time there. And these are some 2 or 3 of the richest seams of town, with the outskirts of Paris, the other one, of footballing town. And that I feel we haven't got under the skin of the kind of murkiness of all of this, because this is a industry that is worth multiple billion pounds or euro dollars every year, the football player trading market. These players are coming through, obviously not at that level immediately, but that they are part of that story. And wherever there's money to be made, I think deserves a very, very large microscope. And we're going to find, maybe we don't want to know, but I think that is kind of underreported, and I feel like we kind of need to. And my kind of one of my reasons for doing this, one of the stories I did was actually after I'd returned from Brazil. I had to go back there in tragic circumstances when there was a fire in the academy at Flamengo, which is Brazil's most popular team, but by quite some distance, and one of its wealthiest. These boys that were among the most promising players they had, a year or 2 at the time younger than Vinicius Jr., who went through the same place. I think half a dozen or more tragically lost their lives in a fire inside this cabin or some sort of rigged accommodation that they had for them. And that, while I was doing the reporting for that initial fire, was like, where are these players coming from? And then you end up finding people who trade them like commodities. In fact, I met a commodity trader, grains, foodstuffs, and football players. And I was like, this is pretty wild. And I don't think we've touched the surface on some of this stuff. I think that I would like to kind of look at more, or would like to read about more.
Yeah, and it brings those two worlds together again, the sort of the dream factory element of it, but also the kind of messy reality sometimes that is a people business.
Yeah. And it's the biggest cultural export for all of these countries in many ways, right? It is the thing that is passionately followed in a way that nothing else is in the world. And, these are the people in the background that are kind of greasing the wheels somehow and benefiting from it. And they're kind of often in the shadows. And also the lives of these boys and now girls who are coming to professional football. Where are they coming from, and what do they have to do to get seen, or to get where they're trying to get to? And what's the imperative from their families and things? It's super interesting.
Yeah. Well, we'll look out for that. And it's all going to keep you busy over the next year, Tariq. And I appreciate you taking a bit of time to walk us through some of it.
Yeah, nice to be with you, man.
Cheers, mate. Outlines is an original production from 2640.